Held in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
The news comes to you compliments of KFC. It's finger licking good. First, the highlights. Government has announced a 7% across-the-board wage and salary increase for government employees. Advisor on Borders Carl Greenwich clarifies that his letter to President Ali addresses inappropriate ministerial communication about the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy. The feasibility study for the construction of the bridge over the Quarantine River to be completed shortly. The Guyana Public Service Union case, in which it is asking the High Court to quash government COVID vaccination measures, has been deferred to January 20, 2022. And police say they have destroyed more than $2 billion in suspected marijuana plants on a 40-acre farm in the Upper Berbice River, Region 10. In the region, a former Dutch St. Martin parliamentarian convicted for taking kickbacks from government contracts have been jailed and barred from contesting elections. The government of Antigua and Barbuda has announced that secondary schools will be open for face-to-face learning for both vaccinated and unvaccinated students in January 2022. And internationally, the Polish authorities say Belarus has cleared migrant camps on the border with Poland that has been fueling tension between Belarus and the EU. Details of these and other stories in a moment.
KFC delivery is now available from the Amazonia location. For shore-based Little Diamond residents, call 632-0533, 632-0533, 6080162, 6080162, or 503-3591, 503-3591. That's KFC's delivery service from the Amazonia location. KFC.
It's finger licking good.
With the news at this time, I am Ruth Wilson. Good evening. And now the news in detail. Public servants will receive a 7% wages and salary increase across the board in December of this year. Finance Minister Dr. Ashni Singh announced the salary increase during a nationwide live broadcast this afternoon.
I am pleased to announce now that your government will be paying an across-the-board increase of 7% to public servants, teachers, members of the disciplined services, constitutional office holders, as well as government pensioners. This increase will be granted retroactively to 1st of January 2021, and work will start immediately to ensure that it is processed and paid to eligible employees together with their December salary and in time for the festive Christmas season. Instructions have already been issued for the work to commence immediately to implement these measures we have just announced.
The Finance Minister also announced a one-off payment for healthcare workers without releasing details.
Your government has set aside an amount of $400 million for a special 2021 payout to be made to frontline workers in the health sector who have continued to face extenuating circumstances in the daily discharge of their duties as our country and the world continue to battle the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic. The details of this payout will be announced shortly, and the payout will be made to eligible employees before the end of before the end of December 2021.
The Guyana Public Service Union Vice President Don Gardner confirmed to News Talk Radio 103.1 FM that the government did not consult with the union on the wages and salary increase announced by the Finance Minister. The union says the government has so far not responded to its invitation for talks on increases and has refused to meet with the union. The union says it will issue a response to the announced increase. Guyana's agent on the border case with Venezuela at the World Court, Carl Greenwich, has defended a leaked letter. He says that this letter to President Irfaan Ali back in April had addressed ministerial behavior. Foreign Affairs Minister Hugh Todd and Governance Affairs Minister Gil Teixeira had been in that meeting. Mr. Greenwich told a media conference on Thursday that he had never intended to sow discord, but to address communication issues.
In fact, the letter, although pointing to likely adverse implications of ministerial decisions, was primarily about inappropriate ministerial behavior and language, as well as about the consequences of discussing a particular topic in public. And in public, I mean with TV coverage at that stage in time. Again, I repeat, the issue, the letter was about some things that were very specific, had nothing to do with many of the topics I see mentioned in the press, both the social media and in the press. And that really is very disappointing.
Mr. Greenwich questioned the motive for leaking the letter by him to President Irfaan Ali, although the matter had been resolved 7 months ago. Mr. Greenwich classified the leak of the document as reckless, reprehensible, and naive. The advisor on borders says he is committed to continuing the process on the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy.
The Foreign Affairs press release indicates that a common understanding exists within the team. And this is as it should be, because since 2016, there has been an agreement between opposition and government as to the virtue of their full joint participation in the deliberations in question and the court hearings. My critical role in this exercise has been forging that understanding, and I intend, in the national interest, to continue along that path in a non-partisan way.
Guyana is expected to complete its memorial for submission to the International Court of Justice on March 7, 2022. Venezuela is scheduled to submit 1 year later. Meanwhile, the Foreign Affairs Ministry's claim that certain experienced officers at the ministry were excluded from working on the team of the Guyana-Venezuela border case was today rejected by the border advisor, Carl Greenwich. Mr. Greenwich says the release incorrect statements were made because those persons were not familiar with the issue and did not conduct research. He says both officers have worked and continue to work with the team that is fighting Guyana's legal battle at the World Court.
But both Ms. Trishala Prasad and Ms. Donnet Street were and always have been integrally involved prior to Minister Todd's appointment, and they've continued to be involved. In addition, and as to be expected, the legal and frontiers departments of the ministry have traditionally been integral parts of the process, regardless of government changes, which makes much of the material on show in the press and even in the press release rather astonishing.
The ministry's release stated that certain key officers at the ministry who have knowledge of the border issues and know the boundaries had been excluded from the process by the previous coalition administration. Mr. Greenwich says it was established by both the opposition and government that there will be continuity of the team, and that agreement is still in place. The feasibility study for the construction of the bridge over the Quarantine River will be completed shortly. Star News reports that head of the Bridges Department at Suriname's Ministry of Public Works, Farazia Atola, says that a tender will be issued next month to allow engineering firms to submit designs for the bridge. The disclosure was made after an orientation visit to Guyana earlier this week. A delegation consisting of representatives of the Ministry of Public Works, a consultancy company, and contractors was in Guyana for talks about the construction of the bridge over the Quarantine River. Guyana and Nickerie were visited to see the places where the bridge will be built. The engineering firms were given the opportunity to become familiar with the site and ask questions that will help them to design the bridge. The Suriname government says the more than 5-kilometer journey will include a connection to Long Island in the Quarantine River. Both countries hope to start construction of the bridge by next year's end. The Guyana Public Service Union GPSU case in which it is asking the High Court to quash government's COVID vaccination measures deferred to January 20, 2022. The respondent, the Attorney General, filed his response to the defense late. This prompted the attorney for the GPSU, Darren Wade, to request more time to respond. Time was granted by Chief Justice Roxanne George, and she then issued timelines for submission for the substantive matter. The court set January 20, 2022 for oral arguments. The Guyana Teachers Union, Guyana Public Service Union, and their umbrella Guyana Trades Union Congress have asked the High Court to quash the government's vaccination policy that they say amounts to coercion to take the jab against the viral disease. Also named as applicants are GPSU's Vice President Don Gardner, GTU's General Secretary Coretta McDonald, and GTUC's General Secretary Lincoln Lewis. The lone respondent is the Attorney General Anil Nandlal. The trade union organizations want the High Court to quash the COVID-19 Emergency Measures No. 20 notice dated the 29th day of July 2021 and published in the extraordinary publication of the Official Gazette dated the 29th day of July 2021. Additionally, they are asking that the state bear the cost of a COVID-19 testing regime for employees of the state of Guyana until the determination of the fixed date application. The government is open to purchasing the anti-COVID pill when it becomes available and is approved. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony, during his COVID-19 update on Thursday, said the approved drug will be important in Guyana to treat the viral disease.
It is something that we are looking at. As I've said before, we have reviewed the efficacy of the medication. It seemed to be working quite well, and therefore, as soon as it's made available and it's licensed, then that's something that we'll want to look at, and it's certainly a medication that we'll want to add to the meds that we already have been using to treat COVID-19.
Manufacturer of one such pill, Pfizer, has signed an agreement with the World Health Organization's patent department to allow other companies around the world to be licensed to produce the pill. The arrangement will allow for more access to the pills easily and cheaper for the treatment of COVID-19. The pill is said to be more than 90% effective in early trials, which were halted to begin production because of its effectiveness. The Ministry of Health says there is a slight increase in active and new COVID cases in the last 24 hours. The COVID death toll is now 968, with the passing of 3 unvaccinated persons. The Health Minister, Dr. Frank Anthony, during Thursday's COVID update.
So in terms of the cases that we have as of yesterday, we have 2,049 cases that are active. And over the last 24 hours or so, we would have been able to detect 91 new cases.
The health minister says there is increased hospitalization as a result in both serious and moderate cases.
Of these cases, of the 2,049 cases, we currently have 64 persons in hospital, with 37 of them at the Ocean View Hospital, and 16 of those persons are in the ICU. We currently have, of the 64 persons that we have in hospital, 44 of them require some amount of oxygen. So across the different hospitals where they're located, they're receiving the oxygen.
The health minister says as of Wednesday, the ministry fully vaccinated 266,127 adults and 19,758 children. He says the number of adults partially vaccinated total 394,094, and children partially vaccinated total 28,551. Police say they have destroyed 500,000 cannabis plants at a farm at Maria Henrietta Village, Upper Berbice River. The police say the plants ranging from 1 to 8 feet in height were destroyed along with 2,000 pounds of dried cannabis, 100 pounds of cannabis seeds, and 4 nurseries, all to a value of $2 billion. The release by the Guyana Police Force stated that ranks of Regional Division 10 conducted the eradication exercise on 40 acres of land at the said location. Police say when ranks arrived at the location, 2 males were seen attending to cannabis plants and upon seeing the police, fled into the vegetation and subsequently made good their escape in an engine boat. Ranks conducted further checks in the area and 4 nurseries and 6 camps suspected to be living quarters. During the search, several suspected emptied 12-gauge shotgun cartridges were found in one of the camps. The suspected cannabis plants and camps were then destroyed by way of fire. Police say the estimated street value for the cannabis plants and dried cannabis is pegged at $2 million. This is News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM. It's 18 hours 16. We now turn to news in the region. Prime Minister Ariel Henry pledged his government's support for the Haitian National Police, PNH, in their efforts to curb the high incidence of criminal activities in the French-speaking Caribbean country. The PM says his government is committed to restoring security and protecting lives and property throughout the country. He added that his government is firmly committed to improving the working conditions of police officers and their environment. PM Ariel Henry met with PNH Commander-in-Chief Franz Albé and other members of the High Command. The visit by Prime Minister Henry, accompanied by senior government ministers, including Justice Minister Liz Quitt, came 48 hours after police say that the body of second-in-command of the 400 Mawozo gang was found on the street on Sunday. The PNH says the Mortimer alias Gaspelage was fatally injured during an exchange of gunfire with law enforcement authorities last Friday. Police say that they had also arrested at a hospital in the capital Wimson Hippolyte, a suspected gang leader, while he was being treated. On Monday evening, heavily armed men attacked the sub-police station located at Pernier, but they were repelled by members of the specialized units of the PNH that were sent to reinforce the police. The police believe that the gunmen belong to the 400 Mawozo gang, who were also blamed for the recent abduction of 17 missionaries from the United States and Canada. The gang has demanded a ransom of $17 million. A former parliamentarian in Dutch St. Martin has been jailed, fined and banned from running for political office after he was found guilty of corruption. The Daily Herald reports that the Court of First Instance also ordered Franz Richardson to repay criminal proceeds amounting to $470,000. His defense lawyer, Samira Roseberg, immediately filed an appeal. In determining the sentence, the court considered the fact that Richardson was sentenced to 36 months for a similar offense on January 29, 2020. While the prosecution had asked for Richardson to be jailed for 2 years and banned from running for political office for 4 years, the court decided to sentence him to 12 months imprisonment. He has also been barred from contesting elections for 3 years. In the Aquamarine 2 case, Richardson was found guilty of having requested substantial amounts of money from a construction company or its contractor and the owner of a hardware store. The money had been for repairs of storm damage to a building in which the government-owned agency Bureau Telecommunication and Post BTP is located. In return for the money, Richardson used his influence as a politician to ensure that Taliesin Construction Company would be awarded contracts for maintenance and repair work for BTP and to fast-track payment of existing contracts with BTP. The court also heard that he abused his political functions as a member of the parliamentary committee to gain personal benefit, and he was also a shareholder of two companies, one of which he had financial interest in a contract. The court found the former parliamentarian guilty of receiving bribes, partly under the guise of donations to his United St. Martin party. The court heard that he forced a businessman to pay him large sums of money in the hope that the paying party hoped to preferentially receive government contracts, ensure payments are made on a timely basis, and more contracts were awarded. Climate change will cause major financial losses in Barbados and present several risks to the island's infrastructure, a new World Bank report says, as it lays out grim prospects for the island in the grip of global warming. According to Barbados Today News, the report 360 Degrees Resilience, a guide to prepare the Caribbean for a new generation of shocks, estimates that Barbados could experience an average annual loss of $103.5 million or 0.74% of GDP due to natural hazards. It estimates that beach nourishment costs for the island could reach between $23.6 million and $118 million, assuming no additional adaptation action is required. According to the World Bank, the cost of retrofitting existing infrastructure assets that are exposed to hazards could range between 0.3% and 1.1% of 2019 gross domestic product. It points out that while the probability of occurrence for extreme heat, wildfire, urban flooding, and river flooding were low, the risk for coastal flooding, hurricane, landslide, earthquake, and tsunami were medium. The 2-year research report, which was released on Wednesday at an online seminar, predicts that climate change impacts on Barbados by 2050 could result in an 18% loss in agricultural yield and an increase of about 32 days in annual extreme heat days. Former Prime Minister Baldwin Spencer says 3 buses donated by the government of South Korea were not considered property of the government of Antigua and Barbuda directly, as the trial of 3 former ministers accused of embezzlement continued Wednesday. Antigua Newsroom reported Wednesday that the former Prime Minister Baldwin Spencer, 73, told the High Court that the request for the buses was not a government-to-government endeavor. Former Education Minister Dr. Jackie Quinn Leandro, former Finance Minister and UPP leader Harold Lovell, and former Deputy Prime Minister Wilmoth Daniel are on trial accused of corruption, conversion, and embezzlement involving the acquisition of 3 2008 Daewoo buses estimated at $600,000 EC, allegedly donated to the government of Antigua by the South Korean government. The trio, who all served in Spencer's administration, were charged in October 2019, 2 years after Magistrate Conliffe Clark dismissed the case. They have all pleaded not guilty to the charges. The prosecution is alleging that while they were in public office, the trio converted the buses for their personal use and had them registered at the Antigua and Barbuda Transport Board in their names. During the trial on Wednesday, 3 insurance representatives testified that the former cabinet ministers had insured 1 bus at each of their companies. But Spencer, who was also the Foreign Affairs Minister at the time of the donation, said in his sworn testimony that he, the late Ambassador John Ash, had held a side meeting with then Ambassador of South Korea at an event to discuss the need for buses in communities on the island. Spencer told the court that he did not allocate the buses, nor was it a cabinet decision, because it was not a situation where the request for the endeavor was to be government to government. He further told the court that Ash, a former president of the United National General Assembly who died in New York in June of 2016, had organized, negotiated, and made most of the decisions in that regard. The government of Antigua and Barbuda has announced that secondary schools will be open for face-to-face learning for both vaccinated and unvaccinated students in January of 2022. The Antigua newsroom has reported that the cabinet met with its acting chief medical officer, the director of education, and the director of pharmaceutical services before arriving at that decision. The meeting agreed that the global figures within all secondary schools indicate that herd immunity has been achieved and more than 80% of the secondary school student population is now vaccinated. The cabinet note states that in balancing the benefits against the risk, the government has agreed that face-to-face learning of all secondary school students, whether vaccinated or not, shall commence in the new school term in January 2022. It was also agreed that the ministry will conduct sessions with parents of unvaccinated students to inform them of the necessity to act now and not delay in getting their children vaccinated. All students who attend classes and are still not vaccinated come January 2022 will be subjected to a COVID-19 test every 2 weeks. There will be no charges for these tests. 18 hours at 26. Now for international news from the BBC.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. The Polish authorities say Belarus has cleared a migrant camp on the border that had been fueling tensions between Minsk and the EU. More than 1,000 people trying to reach the EU have been moved from the makeshift camp to a nearby warehouse. Adam Easton reports from Poland.
Poland's border guard agency posted aerial video footage that appeared to show the camp almost deserted and the migrants walking into a warehouse several hundred metres away. In Warsaw, Germany's Interior Minister Horst Seehofer denied Belarus's claims his government had agreed to take in some of the migrants stranded on the Polish-Belarusian border. He said doing so would be taking part in what he called Belarus's perfidious strategy to destabilise the EU. He said by refusing the migrants' entry, Poland was acting in the interests of the whole of the bloc.
Meanwhile, more than 400 Iraqis have arrived back in their country after being repatriated on a flight from Belarus. They'd been among thousands of migrants camped in near-freezing temperatures on the Polish border, all hoping to enter the European Union. With more details, here's Mike Thompson.
Many looked weary as they stepped down off the plane on arrival in Erbil, capital of the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq. Some were seen hiding their faces to avoid being recognised. Many were carrying the little they had in backpacks or plastic bags. Others stayed aboard and were flown on to Baghdad. Western nations have accused Belarus's president, Alexander Lukashenko, of encouraging the migrants to come to Belarus and then sending them to the EU border in revenge for sanctions imposed last year after his brutal crackdown on the opposition.
A judge in New York has officially exonerated 2 men wrongly convicted of the murder in 1965 of the civil rights leader Malcolm X. The judge said Mohammed A. Aziz and Khalil Islam, who spent 2 decades in jail, had suffered a miscarriage of justice. Both men were released on parole in the 1980s, and Khalil Islam died in 2009. Their case in court was argued by the lawyer Cyrus Vance, as Barbara Pletusha reports from Washington.
This was the formal hearing where he presented his case to the judge and said that based on evidence that they had found that was not put in the trial at the time, and if it had been, would have benefited the defendants. That was the main reason he was calling now for those convictions to be quashed. And the judge responded, agreed with him basically. She had quite a strong statement. She said these exonerations should be used sparingly and in that rare case when it cries out for fundamental justice. There can be no question that this is a case that cries out for fundamental justice.
World News from the BBC. A US state governor has commuted the death sentence of a black man who had always denied committing murder in a case that has sparked public protests. Julius Jones was sentenced to death for the murder of a white insurance executive during a carjacking in 1999. The United States says it's considering a diplomatic boycott of next year's Beijing Winter Olympics. President Biden made the comment during a meeting with Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. A diplomatic boycott would mean athletes would still compete at the Games, but government officials would not attend. The Winter Olympics are set to take place next February. Police in southern Brazil have arrested a gang that slaughtered stolen horses and sold the meat to restaurants as beef. Intercepted phone conversations show that they also used rotten meat to produce burgers and steaks. The details from our Americas editor, Leonardo Rocha.
Police say the clandestine abattoirs had appalling hygiene standards and provided as much as 800 kilos of horse meat to local businesses every week. Investigators believe that many of the horses were sold to the criminals by carriage drivers in rural areas who stole the animals from one another. The gang operated in the state of Rio Grande do Sul on the border with Uruguay and Argentina. The region is proud of the quality of its beef and doesn't have a culture of eating horse meat.
The Constitutional Court in Colombia is considering a proposal to decriminalise abortion, which is currently punishable with 4-year prison sentences for women. Hundreds of demonstrators gathered outside the court in the capital, Bogotá, demanding that women be given the right to opt for a termination. The court has a deadline on Friday to rule on the issue. Any change is opposed by the Catholic Church and other groups who say that life begins at conception and must be protected. That's the latest BBC News.
And that's the news to the moment.
After a hard day's work, a lime at the workplace will be great, and even greater and better with KFC, with a wide choice of finger-licking meals in a wide range of sizes. Could be a birthday celebration or promotion, or a lime for no reason at all. Any lime, anytime, anywhere is better and tastier with a delicious meal from any of KFC's 9 locations, including the Amazonia Mall at Providence, open now from 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. KFC.
It's finger-licking good.
To end the news, here's a recap of the highlights. Government has announced a 7% across-the-board wage and salary increase for government employees. Advisor on Borders Carl Greenwich clarifies that his letter to President Ali addresses inappropriate ministerial communication about the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy. The feasibility study for the construction of the bridge over the Quarantine River to be completed shortly. And the Guyana Public Service Union case in which it is asking the High Court to quash government COVID vaccination measures has been deferred to January 20, 2022. Police say they have destroyed more than $2 billion in suspected marijuana plants on a 40-acre farm in the Upper Berbice River, Region 10. In the region, a former Dutch St. Martin parliamentarian convicted for taking kickbacks from government contracts has been jailed and barred from contesting elections. The government of Antigua and Barbuda has announced that secondary schools will be open for face-to-face learning for both vaccinated and unvaccinated students in January of 2022. And internationally, the Polish authorities say Belarus has cleared migrant camps on the border with Poland that has been fueling tension between Belarus and the EU. The news came to you compliments of KFC. It's finger-licking good.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.